Welcome to this virtual gathering space, beloveds. Warm and joyful greetings to each of you today. I invite you to settle in. It is now the time for the webinar to start, but we have some really important conversations happening today, just as we've had all year long, and in particular, the last 2 weeks with Roberto. I am Ellie Hutchison. I am the Minister for Church and Community Engagement with the Faith Info team, and we are a part of the Love of Church at the national setting of the United Church of Christ. And welcome to Nurture the Soul. This is a weekly webinar sharing practical, educational, innovative, and formational resources that invite you to engage in critical topics for our local churches and for our people of faith. We faithfully focus on care and education for and by the people of God, from cultural community organizing to congregational leadership, worship and theology to resourcing small and rural churches, from ministry to youth and children, ranging in a wide range of justice issues. We feature guests and artists and authors and key leaders and thought partners. We try to stay current to how the gospel is alive in this time. We hope that this is a space for connection, community, and nurture, and that together we can bring our church, our communities, and the world towards the world that God imagines for all of us. Join us every Thursday at 3:30 p.m. Eastern Standard Time for Nurture the Soul. And from time to time, look for special offerings, for we are always trying to produce, and bring you opportunities to engage you in some of those deeper questions. You can find our upcoming digital offerings at ucc.org/events or in our social media platforms. Friends and beloveds, if these conversations move you, if what's offered here helps to enhance your ministry or your soul, please do consider donating to the annual fund of the United Church of Christ. And you can do this by texting UCC to 41444. Your prayerful and financial support helps programs like this and stories like this get told. This is the essential work of the United Church of Christ. Thank you for supporting us, and thank you for being with us today. And so it is my honor and pleasure to welcome Reverend Roberto. Thank you for bringing the series to our ears and our hearts, and thank you for being in this journey with me.
Oh, Reverend Ellie, it's a pleasure working with you, and it's a pleasure to welcome everybody. Thank you so much. Like Ellie said, I am the Reverend Roberto Ochoa. I am the UCC National Minister for Ethnic Inclusion, as well as congregational support for our rural and small membership churches. So I am glad that you're here with us, and I'm thrilled to be able to introduce my dear friend, Vicar Lisa Robison, to join us to have this conversation on pastoring ecumenically, on this, our second installment of our series on thriving small town and rural churches, what we affectionately call our UCC STAR for small town and rural churches. So how you doing, Lisa? I'm going to read your bio in a sec.
Awesome. I'm wonderful. Thank you so much for having me.
Of course, on this 29th day of February, that happens every four years. So like the day, this is extraordinary to have you with us. Lisa, Vicar Lisa Robison was born in Hartley, a small rural town in northwest Iowa. She now lives in Iowa Falls, Iowa, with her husband Ryan and their 3 children, Riley, who's 14, Davis, who's 8, and Kalel, who is 6. Lisa serves cross-denominationally in both an Evangelical Lutheran Church in America, ELCA, congregation, and the United Church of Christ congregation. She is in her 4th year of serving and will graduate with a Master of Divinity from Wartburg Theological Seminary in Dubuque, Iowa in May. Congratulations. And you're going to get ordained in June. Lisa is currently part of a team working on research in the area of women serving in small town and rural ministry. This research is being conducted to aid in the establishment of resources for the large number of women who are serving in this context. She is also in the process of writing her master's thesis on the necessity of clergy serving in rural contexts to receive mandatory mental health training. She is passionate about rural ministry and the education and support of clergy in rural contexts. Lisa sits on the executive board of the International Rural Church Association. She is also a member of the Rural Church Network in the United States and Canada, as well as her local ministerial associations. I had the pleasure of meeting Lisa a couple of years ago when we were both on an immersion trip on the Appalachians in Kentucky. And I was fascinated by her story and her narrative. And so I'm just tickled that we have this opportunity to actually have an online conversation, Lisa, on this growing trend of ecumenical pastoring that especially we're finding in our rural and small towns. I personally have experienced it from an ethnic perspective. It's not unusual in the Latinx context and in others where we're called to pastor cross-denominationally because of resource needs. So, and I've been noticing this increase. So Lisa, again, welcome. And just tell us a little bit about yourself, because you are, as I understand, UCC born and raised, but ending up in the ordination process of the ELCA. Tell us
Yes.
a little bit about that.
So, first and foremost, when I sent that bio in, I failed to realize, and my son would like, he is now 9. He turned 9 on the 27th, but I was not thinking when I
That's
wrote.
important. That is really important stuff. So
It
we
is. And
acknowledge
you're a
that.
9-year-old. That is super important. So yes, I was born and raised, baptized and confirmed in the UCC Church, Trinity United Church of Christ in Hartley, Iowa, and had a wonderful upbringing there, and was really influenced by a couple of pastors that I had. However, as we grow and change, I attended my first year of undergrad, I attended a small liberal arts college, and then kind of struggled with my faith. And I did go away for the church from a time. Coming back to church was at a UCC. And then when we moved, I met my husband and I moved to Iowa Falls. My sister was attending an ELCA congregation, and they welcomed us there, and it was a wonderful fit. And I think it's, we're full communion partners with ELCA.
Yeah.
And that was just where we made our home. And Wartburg has this amazing program called the Collaborative Learning Program. So you go through seminary and you serve in a context. And so in real time, you can apply the things you're learning and learn things from the congregation. And they do that. And it's helped really fill a need in the ELCA of churches that need leaders. And so I have been in that program. This is my 4th year. I will finish in May. And I'm very excited. Ordination is scheduled for June. And I am blessed to be able to stay in the calls that I am in, which is in Iowa Falls, which is a town of about 5,000 people.
Mm-hmm.
And then Wellsburg, which is about 714 people.
And how did you end up being called to these locations?
So I was placed in my ELCA congregation by the Synod, which is kind of like our conference in the UCC. There was an opening they had, and the bishop's assistant and the bishop thought it would be a great fit. And it really has been. They do a wonderful job of kind of vetting these vetting these congregations, if they are open to serving with a student. And St. Paul's had several interns. And being a very small rural congregation, sometimes that's all they've had serving was interns. So they were open, and they're a very wonderful teaching congregation. So that is how I ended up there. I had been there for a year, and our associate conference minister, Kendi Miller, was serving at First Congregational UCC, and just kind of gave me a heads up. I had pulpit supplied here when she was gone before, here at UCC, and they asked if I would fill in after she took her call down at conference. And I said, I will for the summer. I'm not really sure how I can handle all of that and be a mom and a wife and a student and all the things. And I had CPE, clinical pastor education, coming up that fall. So in July I started, and in the fall it was going really well, and it really felt like home. And some people are like, how do you serve two congregations? They both very much feel like home to me. So I agreed to stay on as kind of an interim clergy for them. And now with some of the changes in first call process in the ELCA, I am able to stay where I'm at and do this joint ecumenical call. And I am super excited to do those. So
that is so amazing. That is so amazing. So if you will, describe a little bit of what St. Paul is like.
So St. Paul is almost your quintessential little white country church that has a cemetery right beside it. We worship average of about 30 a Sunday. It is a very familial church, with some of the people that worship there going back to, the people that donated the land to be built on, for the church to be built on. They have celebrated, I think we're at 155 years of being a congregation, 1873. So however the math works out for that, because I'm not mathing today. And wonderful. Just this wonderful church that has, has a youth group, has some Sunday school. We don't have a lot of children at that context, but what we do, they're very wonderful and enjoy what they do. And so we just continue to do ministry there. I'm very passionate in the small town and rural ministry area that small town and rural places deserve good pastors.
Yes.
They deserve to be served in the same way that urban areas have pastors to be served. And the work they do there is no less important than the work that's done in urban areas at bigger congregations.
Amen. So agreed. And so how about First Congregational in Iowa Falls?
Absolutely. St. Paul, I will tell you, is out in the middle of nowhere.
Oh, wow.
It's 2 miles from town. It sits on a highway, so you can see it. If you're familiar with Iowa, as you drive past Highway 20, you see it from the road. A lot of people kind of see it as this beacon that reminds them who Christ is as they pass by. In comparison, First Congregational also averages about 30 a Sunday for worship. We are in town in Iowa Falls, just a few blocks from the downtown, and both are a little older congregations. We tend to see fewer children at our service in in Iowa Falls, but we do have, a 5-member confirmation class right now, and things are going well. Both congregations are excited to do the work of God, and that's wonderful.
And so what surprised you the most pastoring these two churches, would you say?
Well, the very first thing is because it is small town and rural context, both places. The organist at the church I serve in Wellsburg went to school with the organist of the church I serve in Iowa Falls. They graduated together. So I get away with nothing. They keep good tabs on me.
Okay.
So that's always a thing. But I think what surprised me most about both places is with the average age of attendees being in that 65 plus range, how committed they all are to doing work. the work of Christ and sharing that love with others and how that's done. It's not a retirement church where people are just content to be in the four walls and do things. There is mission and ministry happening, and I love to see that vitality in an older congregation.
And what are some of the challenges that both congregations face?
I would say for St. Paul, being a rural congregation, kind of in the middle of nowhere, right? We don't get that foot traffic that you would somewhere in town. And as people get older and move away off family farms, and different people are buying up different pieces of land, you're kind of losing that neighborhood of a rural church. And there aren't kids. And so I think sometimes having that conversation that you don't necessarily, having children in a congregation is amazing and it's wonderful, but there is still good and faithful work that can be done no matter the age of those that attend.
Mhm.
And it doesn't make it any less, it just makes it different.
Yeah.
And finding the ways to do that. I would say that kind of speaks for the UCC First Congregational as well. We are in the process, and COVID kind of threw a loop in that, of going through ONA. And in a fairly conservative part of Iowa, there are some challenges with that. But our members are up for that challenge and find that work very important. And that gives me great hope. So
for those who don't know, ONA stands for Open and Affirming, and this is the affirmation of our LGBTQ plus siblings. That's part of the United Church of Christ. In the ELCA, that would be the reconciling ministers, right?
yes, reconciling in Christ. So RIC is what the letters are there. So yes.
Yes. So awesome. And we'll get back to that in a bit, later on. But so for you personally, here you were born and raised UCC, and then you found this ELCA congregation that welcomed you. Theologically, and then you went to seminary in the ELCA, Lutheran seminary. So how have you evolved theologically, and how have you been able to bridge the two faith traditions in your ministry? How do you do that?
Absolutely. So that one of my biggest things is, as leaders in the church, I think it's important that we realize that we're there to serve the church. All right. We're called to serve the church, those in the church. And so it's very important for me when somebody says, oh, so where are you, pastor? And some people will say, oh, my church is this. For my frame of reference and for mine, it's very important to me that the church I serve is, because that's where I'm called. And as someone serving two different denominations, that has to be at the forefront of my mind. I'm here to serve in this context and serve these wonderful humans that are at both congregations. And that's what's important, is that I'm there to serve. Being full communion partners, there are some differences in theology, but that extravagant love of Christ and love of God is at the forefront of both denominations. And so that makes that a lot easier. And I think in all the theology that comes in going to seminary and hearing those lessons, reminding people after all that love of Christ, unique and individually as each of us are, spans that denominational divide. But also growing up and being baptized and confirmed and having to learn the chart of evangelical and reformed and congregation, and learning, the fifth stream as we welcome in, our African-American roots and how that's all confined. That helps me a lot, right? To say, so here we're reading this, our evangelical and reform roots would say, versus, on, oh gosh, On days when things are very much Luther the Reformer, being able to stand up and say, so Martin Luther says this, right? How do we pull that in and look at all the reformers and how those interconnect and do those well?
Sure. Sure.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah.
If any of that made sense.
It made sense to me. It made sense to me. What is it? So I guess what comes to mind is, how do you divide your time in the pastoral needs of your congregations? You know, how does that work?
So the beauty of the two congregations that I serve is they are very understanding of that it's this dual ministry. I have a day that I'm in the office one place, a day that I'm in the office the other, but other days it's running between pastoral care calls and being in school full time. They're very cognizant of that too, and super supportive. You know, I have a family and 3 wonderful children and a husband. And sometimes when we're in our roles as leaders of the church and we're called to care for others, sometimes it's easy for things to get left on the back burner at home. And they are both very conscious of, you know what, you need to spend this time this weekend with your family. You need to, you know, take this time. That's okay. A lot of us that are in this profession are fixers or peacekeepers, and we want to do that for everyone, but it's hard to remember we need to do that at home as well. And so, and I realize that not all situations are like that, but I am super blessed to be in congregations that understand that there are multiple roles that I am filling, and that sometimes there's going to be a funeral someplace, or there's going to be a special service that the other doesn't have. And so maybe that week I'm more at one place, and maybe the next week I'm more at another, and kind of how the rolling times work with that. But they have been amazing. And in both congregations, I have retired pastors that also attend and are members. And that support has been beyond valuable to me, to have somebody say, I get what you're going through. It'll be okay. Or good luck with your test that week. I remember taking something like that. You know, you'll survive. And it's good to know that there's a light at the end of the tunnel that is seminary sometimes.
And touching base on family, because I know you wear a lot of hats and you're involved in a lot. But as a wife and a mother of 3 children, how do they identify themselves, you know, with church? Are they part of church, or are they forming themselves? How are you bringing that into your, you know, in your household, if I can ask that?
Oh, absolutely. Right. So we have 6, 9, and 14, totally, completely different ages. Because there were no, when I started at the UCC congregation, we had already been at the ELCA congregation for a year. And so they attend Sunday school there. And right now the worship schedule is we have 8 o'clock Sunday school at St. Paul, 9:15 service, and then 9:15 service, and then 11 o'clock service at UCC. And so a lot of Sundays they go to both. People are very, very patient with them, which is great because they are small children. But I think it's been fabulous that they can see sometimes the theological differences, but that also both places really claim them as a part of who they are. It's led to lots of conversations with my 14-year-old about who we are and what we believe. We tend to be in a more conservative town here in Iowa Falls, and we are very much a family that God loves you exactly as you are, no matter what. That grace of God is extended to you by no work you do on your own, but because you are a child of God. And it has been interesting and wonderful to hear her come home and have conversations with me that she's had with other kiddos, or to have my son say, well, I heard this the other day, tell me about that. You know, coming to me with those questions, and to my husband, and like, what do we as a family embrace, and who we are, and what do we believe? And being able to do that growing up in front of two congregations, which I am sure can be difficult. I was not a pastor's kid, but I was a teacher's kid. And so in that respect, I understand the expectations that sometimes come with that and who you are. And you still get to be a kid and a regular person, no matter what your mom or dad does. My husband, full disclosure, is a special ed consultant now, but for 15 years was a principal at the elementary. So there are a lot of expectations placed, and my kid's going to be just like any normal kid. And they're going to do things wrong, and that is okay because there is grace. And yeah, if that's the one thing as a family and as a mom that I can teach my kids is there's grace. And
I love that.
that's okay.
I love that. There's grace. That's grace. So do the two congregations ever do ministries together or events together?
So right now in the summer, we have an outdoor service up in Iowa Falls that we invite the other congregation to. Same thing down there. They're invited to those things. We do a festival of trees up in Iowa Falls. We have music. We always open that up and we get people from both congregations that enjoy that together. Right now, just because of time constraints, with me being in seminary, organization is sometimes hard to come by to get those things done. So my daughter will be confirmed this year down at St. Paul, and her wish was to be able to have everybody together. And so surprise to those of you that are from UCC that are on this webinar, that is something that I am floating to the council next week, is to have a combined Pentecost service, because she really wanted both congregations to be there because they do love her like their own, both of them. And that's important to her. And I love that, the impetus for that is a 14-year-old girl. That's amazing. And I love that. So
That is amazing. I gotta hear what happens with that, so that's what Pentecost is all about,
exactly.
Our young women will see visions and dreams, so, thank you. So back to the O&A. So tell us how that conversation, now, this is First Congregational going through.
Yes, correct.
Beginning. So how did that conversation start?
So that started way before me. I believe it started when Pastor Kendi was here. And prior to her, we had Pastor Sherry Triggs, a phenomenal pastor, who is also a member of the LGBTQIA plus community. And so I think a lot of that groundwork was already in play. And Kendi had done a beautiful job of starting that. And then COVID happened and we weren't gathering together. And then there was a transition in pastors. And that's something that we're trying to pick back up on. And unfortunately, time is a constraint for me right now. Sure. I'm just looking forward to May and being done with class. So there's a lot more, I have more time to help guide these things, because in a town that is, 5,000 and fairly conservative, there aren't a lot of safe places for people in the LGBTQIA plus community to worship. That would be considered safe. That will welcome people of that community exactly as they are. There are some, but I think it's important for that designation so that people can see that, yes, we are. And I think it also surprises people when I talk about that with the average age of our congregation, that that's a priority. Because sometimes it tends not to be, depending on generationally where you're at. And it is so much a priority here that people are cared for and taken care of no matter who they are. And I love that.
So there's this perception, especially those, I guess, from urban settings, that being LGBTQ, being part of that community in a small town, rural, being difficult and not welcoming. And from your perspective, how, besides the church,
Mhm.
how do you think, and being in a conservative community, what would you say the state of being openly gay or lesbian or bi or transgender be like living in Iowa Falls or the rural areas in your part of the state?
I would say it's probably incredibly difficult. There are pockets of Iowa that are incredibly welcoming. But the state of our state right now is that it's incredibly unwelcoming. And being this close to the Minnesota border, which we are, I think it's easy for people to want to say, or in Illinois, just say, this is maybe not the place for me. I can't speak to that because I'm not in that community, but I have a lot of friends and, family members that are in that community. And it's got to be difficult. And dangerous sometimes. We talk about safe places. I know there's a map out there that has, was just, oh gosh, it wasn't that long ago that I saw it, safe places for people that are in the LGBTQIA community, and especially the trans community, to travel. And Iowa was not one of them. And that hurts me because we are all children of God. And when you profess, do you believe in God? How you cannot profess that we are all beloved children of God exactly as we are really bothers me.
And what is your hope through the process of opening and affirming at First Congregation would help with?
I think maybe twofold, that there's this voice that's here to help people in the community share stories, right? And especially in small town or rural contexts, we talk about the importance of story. And when people can identify with other stories, I think it changes sometimes how we think and how we learn. And when someone can stand up in front of a group of people and tell them their story, I am in the LGBTQIA plus community, this is my experience, and people identify with things in their story, it builds a different connection. And telling stories and building those connections is really what brings us together as humans. And it's so important for people to have a space where they can share their stories, a space where they can go, that they know that they can go into worship. And this reason somebody shows them the glances because they've never seen them before. It's not, I'm wondering if you're able to worship here or you're worthy of worshiping here. We're all worthy of being able to walk into a place of worship and praise God and know that we are loved. Every single one of us is. And I really, my hope is that we can be that beacon to stand out and in all the social justice things, be that voice for people.
And so, and with that said, it's just like, there's been a lot of conversations about the church's role in the political process, and how is that conversations handled from your context in the small town rural, and how do understanding that, in my mind, that smaller churches or rural churches and small town churches, have a wider spectrum of folks in your church that may have political differences. So how do you help guide those conversations?
Oh, so many conversations about this. First of all, I don't think we can help but be political because Jesus was political. I think we can not be partisan, but I don't think not being political is an
And
option.
that's a difference. And that's a difference.
Yes.
Being partisan and being political.
Correct. I don't think standing up for rights of humans and things like that should be a question. And sometimes I get a little more excited about those things and kind of have to temper myself down.
Okay.
But I think when we share stories and we share readings from the Bible and we talk about how Jesus would have engaged those things, it helps open our eyes to maybe a way about that. All right. Remind me of the question again. I got so in my head. Now I'm all. all over.
How do you guide the conversations of political polarizations that it seems to be,
Yes.
the national psyche?
Finding that,
And the role of the church in this
yes,
conversation.
I think one of our roles as leaders of the church is to find that common thread of who we are as humans that we all share across time and space. Finding that common thread and realizing sometimes that a step forward is a step forward, no matter how big it is. And sometimes I want it to happen yesterday. And that's just not how humans work.
Yeah.
We take time and we have to internalize things and process things. So sometimes a lot of my conversations are, what about this makes you uncomfortable? Because when we're uncomfortable, we're learning something. Whether it's something good or it's something bad, I like to say that none of us probably were comfortable when we finally learned how to ride a bike. Some few are. I had skin knees and my share of blood, but I learned something in that uncomfortableness, and learning how to sit with that is huge. Part of that move forward for me is I parent my two youngest sons are boys of color. And as a white cishet woman, that was a whole new, in Iowa, that was a whole new experience for me. And having to lean into people that know that well, who have had those experiences, and for me to sit quietly and learn, and I'm still learning every day, that has really changed how I think and how I guide, is leaning into, because I know how uncomfortable I was in some of those conversations I had with folks of color that challenged what I knew growing up and how I thought, and made me really dig deep as into what my core beliefs were and what prejudice I held that I wasn't even aware of. And so looking at, hate as being a product of fear and being able to call a thing what it is, to be a very Lutheran thing there. Why are you afraid of that? Being able to look at ourselves and say, why am I afraid of something? What fear does it have? And is it because I just don't know? Education, looking at our fear and educating ourselves or educating those that we serve, even if it's in little bits, is so pertinent to the work that we're doing.
Well said. Well said. Well said. And so, the United Church of Christ, of course, is viewed as a progressive denomination, that tries to carry all our spectrum in the tent. And some of our works from the national settings, are very progressive sounding, and especially in the area of racial justice, reproductive rights, immigration reform, LGBTQ issues, and our cousins at the ELCA have also, from the national perspective, have also tend to be leaning more liberal. From the local church, how that resonates, those messages, how are those received or resonate that you found in your experience?
I think a lot of times, and this on both sides of the ecumenical partnership there, depending where our churches are at, sometimes kind of dictates how those messages are received. But also sometimes I think there's this disconnect between church-wide in both denominations and the local church. UCC is so very congregationally empowered, is a way to say that, I suppose. And we're ELCA, right? We're a little more top down. We have a synod and we have a conference. But those little local churches sometimes are an island and don't always get the top down memo, right? And so as a leader in those churches, I think it's important to bring those to them so they can hear them, and then we can have discussions. Are they always received well? No, they're not. But one of the very first things I was told at St. Paul when I started there was, my question as a leader is, what are your sacred things? What are your non-negotiables? And for them, it was that we have our children's Christmas program on Christmas Eve, which I can get behind. I have no problem with, and that we don't want to leave the ELCA. Now, as an ELCA seminarian, that does me no good. So I was on board with that. And just hearing that lets me know that they are vested in what the ELCA has to say. And I remind that when I bring those things to the local church that, here are some policies that are happening. Here are some, declarations that are happening up at churchwide so we can see them. And we have discussions, and not everybody's always going to be happy. I think as a people pleaser, that's probably the hardest thing for me in leadership is you're never going to make everybody happy. But how do we educate and have an open mind so that we can hear people's concerns and share stories? Because I'm learning things that aren't my viewpoint as well as they're learning my viewpoint. And that's beautiful, right? Because that's community. And we talk about baptism into this community of believers. We are community. And the thing about family is you don't always get along with family, but you love them, right? And I don't think church is any different. There are times you don't like each other, but you love each other. And so you work through those things and find ways that you can find common ground to make those connections.
What's exciting, Lisa, is that we have a few questions for us for this conversation, and please keep them coming if you like. One from Jeff McDonald, just asking, do you preach the same sermon in both settings? And this is, I guess, the more practical. How many hours do you allocate for each congregation each week? And are some of your hours jointly allocated to both churches? And do both congregations pay the same amount? You don't have to answer that.
No, so I'm compensation wise, it's a little different because I am a student. So as we look forward to First Call and look at, what conference guidelines and synod guidelines are, that's going to change a little bit. Okay. Currently I'm 20 hours and the math doesn't math. 20 hours at St. Paul and 24 hours at UCC. And as all of us in leadership know, there's no such thing as a part-time call ever, right? It pervades all of your being. Do I preach the same sermon? So I'm an outline preacher. I do better when I have my main thoughts down and can expound on those kind of extemporaneously. It is not the same sermon because they are different congregations and they are different groups of communities. And what the Spirit says one needs to hear is not always what the Spirit says the other needs to hear. And so they end up sometimes being very similar, but very different. And my husband kind of giggles sometimes as we call it double churching on Sunday morning when they do that. And what the difference is. And it's fun to hear somebody's viewpoint on that when we go home and discuss sometimes. It's like, oh, so why did you decide this here, that here? And a lot of it is because the joy of a small town and rural congregation that worships about 30 is I know everybody very intimately. You shared meals, you shared joys and concerns and funerals with families, and they've known you and you know them, and which makes it harder and easier sometimes to know what you need to say or what needs to be brought forward. So that's that. I'm trying to think. A few of those hours are jointly allocated. But sermon prep takes a different toll. Sometimes those are jointly allocated, but as we all know, right, stopping at 45 hours, it just doesn't happen because you live in this world and it's so much a part of who you are that Sunday night, when I look at the text for the upcoming week, because I am in school and I don't have the fabulousness of having months of sermons planned ahead. And that's just not my personality. Um, you ponder those things and live with them the whole week. And what I think the sermon's about on Monday is not always what it ends up being on Saturday night.
And do you follow the lectionary? Is that how
We
you?
do. Actually, both churches do, so that is nice. I love the UCC page, where it has on worship ways where we have like the sermon seeds, and that is one of my favorite things is being able to live into those and having that. But I am also blessed. I have a text study with some very close friends that are in seminary with me, and it's wonderful. We know each other well enough that it gives us time to throw out ideas, and there's that support. Most of them are collaborative learners like I am. And so we're all kind of navigating this school and workspace together. So
I definitely will let my colleague, the Reverend Dr. Cheryl Lindsay, who is our, National Minister of Worship, know that you appreciate what she produces.
oh, I absolutely do. Please do let her know that. I love that.
Yeah.
I finally figured out where the question and answer panel was. So
Oh, so
I'm
you're
looking.
So Pam Bush, she says, why do we feel we need to address our differences regarding all aspects of ethnicity, social, and political? We have differences in every aspect of life. Why does this need to be stand out? And we make it clear that no matter who we are, you are in your journey, you are always welcome.
Oh, that's a great question. This is interesting. We were kind of having this discussion today in one of my classes as it's a living liturgies class. And we were talking about how we preach and address differences and why we do these things. And we were talking about sometimes on the opposite end of the spectrum from where we are as the UCC, why we preach the way we do and why we feel the need to make known the differences. And sometimes how we could be more vocal about them. But we talked about how sometimes we don't want to feel inauthentic by, not a great phrase to use. I don't want to say by spouting propaganda, but by spouting our beliefs, maybe with not full disclosure to what it means to be truly welcome to our church. Because I've seen signs all over that's like, oh, or welcome. But I also know that if I was in a particular community or of a particular race and I went into a church, I'm welcome, but I'm not welcome unless I'm willing to conform to those beliefs. So for me, I think sometimes pointing out the differences is because I want to make sure people know truly and wholly what that means. I don't want it to be a bait and switch. You are all are welcome in this church, but you're not. And so for me, sometimes I think that's why I put that. Maybe I tend to explain that more, even though we do declare that all are welcome no matter what. If that answers that question.
And I mean, I wish that we didn't have to, but I just like it's important to also to be seen is that when I go into spaces and the first thing I hear is that they don't see that I'm Chicano, that I'm Mexican American, or or see me, because this thing about being colorblind, is just like, no, there is a difference that we can share and celebrate. We can celebrate our differences, our ethnic cultures, our sexual orientation differences as communities. But I think it's also important for us is that we to make it clear when a space is safe for especially our LGBTQA folks, but I really appreciate that question because it's true. I wish we didn't have to. Timothy Hogan asked a good question, is that how are you received by other pastors and churches in your community when it comes to your progressive nature?
Oh, so that's special. Thank you for asking that question. It's tough sometimes. I am in a small community, and it is no secret where I serve and whom I serve and what my viewpoints are. And to have kids in that community that are friends with a lot of kids that are in other congregations and other denominations, yeah, it makes life interesting. Sometimes it's not well received at all. Sometimes I know that I am not included in conversations because they know my stance on multiple social justice issues. And that's difficult. Sometimes I'm not included in conversations because of my gender. And that's tough. To sit in a meeting with other pastors whose denominations don't ordain women or people of color or, anybody in the LGBTQIA plus community. Yeah, it's rough. But at the same point, one of my goals this year has been like, I proclaim from the pulpit when I preach that God's love is for each and every one of us exactly as we are. And that's where some of the pastors are. And they're my neighbor. And sometimes that's a really hard pill to swallow when I have to flip it that way on myself and to say, you know what? But they're my neighbor and I love them and they're called to spread the word of God. And so we need to work together to do these things that can only be done when we all band together.
Do you have a support system, ministerial support system near you?
I do. So in our local ministerial system, it includes, we include all the churches that are in our town, which includes like a non-denominational Christian church, two Baptist churches, evangelical free. There's a Quaker church. We have a United Methodist church, an ELCA church in town, and several others. And we do work together well. They do great ecumenical work. But sometimes it's hard to know that sometimes you're excluded because of your beliefs. So is Jesus. So here we go.
And we have that. We have that.
Where's that?
So I'm not quite sure we're going to be able to go through all these questions. Thank you so much, for asking. I'll try another one. From Julianne Dreys Boryarski. Sorry for messing up your name. You mentioned that congregations can be on their own island. And so how do we get away from the island mentality? How do you encourage community and engagement with folks at church? She says, our UCC is also in a very conservative area. How can we show that we are different from the other churches? What the UCC stands for is good. We don't need to change anything. However, how can we get people to attend our service? Especially when most people are for inclusivity, especially younger generations. What an amazing multi-layer question, Julianne.
Oh, very much so. Gosh, for me, getting away from that being an island is moving outside of the building. What is God's mission and ministry calling us to outside of the four walls? Church, and especially when you have places, because we'll celebrate 100 years of this particular building here at UCC this year, is realizing that while it's great to have a building, that's not where we're called to ministry. If we stay inside the building, we're not affecting any change. So how do we move that outside the walls and out to the public? And one of my favorite lines, and I believe, oh gosh, one of our parishioners here at UCC uses this all the time, and I cannot tell you where it's from, and I should be able to, but it is share the gospel daily, and when necessary, use words. So, right? Right. And it'll come to me where that's from. But yeah, it's what we do outside of the building, and that we break out of that island and cross over to other spaces so people can see what we do. And when people can see that we are living that love of Christ out, then maybe that will bring people in. And if it doesn't,
You're telling us it's from St. Francis.
thank you. Yes. Oh my gosh. Some days it's going in one ear and out the other, and I'm not sure it stays in the brain. But right, we're just, even if, and that's a hard thing because, right, another horrible phrase, butts in the seats, right, is what fills our ministry, is what pays the bills. We have people attending and giving, but at the same point, it's really important that we live into where that mission is outside of the church. And if it's 12 people doing that ministry and sharing that mission, it is as important as 200 people doing that mission and sharing that ministry. And which is scary, right? And especially small town or rural ministries, when you do these calculators and you look at your giving and where your trends are for how many people are moving in and out of the area, sometimes that 10-year outlook gets scary. And it's when we have to think about how do we do church differently? So that's only part of that question, but that was very multi-layered.
Well, and I want to recognize, Lawrence Gilly, who, said reading is most helpful, read Vitality of Small Churches. Thank you, Lawrence. And Clarence Moore, who serves 2 churches in rural Vermont, working with a parish, a UCC Methodist Congregational and an Open Christian, and he's learned a lot. And Carter West has an interesting question. Have you had moments where you've had to challenge your congregations to look at their budgets, their building, etc., to assess whether there's ways that they can be used to really serve the gospel?
Again, surprises that people listening are going to find out. I love the idea of a narrative budget that kind of like shows where, this is where our mission and ministry is. These 3 things share our mission and ministry. This is where this is, and how a budget becomes what your church believes. It's not a lot of people have ever looked at a budget that way in certain congregations, and to have your budget be an important part of your mission and ministry, is kind of a radical idea in some places. So before those call votes are done and I let any more secrets out, no.
Right. So, I mean, I wish we could answer all the questions that are coming in, we have this hour, and thank you so much. Thank you everybody for listening, Laura. I mean, Lisa, I am so grateful for our conversations, and I wish you continued blessings on your, on your ministry and what you do out there in the small town rural church and ministries. And so as we close this, can you give us a quick benediction before?
Absolutely. And thank you so much for having me. It was just my joy and honor to be here today.
My joy. Are you kidding me?
May we go forth sharing God's extravagant love with all, speaking the gospel daily, and when necessary, using words. Peace and blessings to you all. Amen.
Amen. Thank you. Ellie, thank you so much.
Wow. Like just wow. Roberto, thank you for putting together this mixed tape of small and rural star churches over the past 2 weeks. It has been an exciting time to be in this worship space with each of you. I have goosebumps and so much to think about and so many comments to read. Thank you all who joined us digitally and shared your comments and your questions with us today. What a special time to be alive. And so I want to just say thank you. We are thankful and grateful for your presence, your gifts, your questions, for being with us during this whole entire journey. We hope that you continue to be with us starting on every Thursday, 3:30 p.m. Eastern Standard Time for Nurture Their Soul. We're always producing opportunities to engage. And next week, wow, I don't know, Roberto. I think the national ministry team is on the hot seat. So come and join us next Thursday at 3:30 p.m. Eastern Standard Time for the opportunity for us to be questioned by the small and rural church about some fantastic topics. Don't forget to join us. Blessings to each and every one of you. Please check our social media sites and our YouTube page for this recording. Bye for now, beloveds.
Siblings in Christ, if you are moved by this conversation, if what's been offered here has helped enhance your ministry or has nurtured your soul for the journey, please consider donating to the annual fund of the United Church of Christ by texting UCC to 41444. Your support will help to provide programs like this, which are an essential part of our ministries in the United Church of Christ. Thank you for your support. Be blessed on your journey and know that you are not alone. We are holding you in prayer. Amen.